Welcome to Life After, a podcast for women to take you from feeling like you're just surviving to thriving, to creating a life you really love. Expect to discover tips and tricks to get there. Each episode will have actionable steps to empower you to make changes. I started this podcast because I've been through it all, from getting out of a marriage with a narcissist to completely rebuilding my life. And now I'm on a mission to help you too. You can change your life. It's absolutely possible. It is my great pleasure to have Melissa on the show today. We have worked together for many years, and Melissa is an amazing collaborator. Melissa Sampson, MBA, is a creative change agent who transforms trauma into healing through storytelling, rebellion, and radical self-trust. She is the founder and executive director of the Breezy Heart Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to raising awareness about narcissistic abuse and providing healing and prevention education through storytelling, creative expression, and community engagement. With a master's in business administration and a passion for purpose-driven leadership, Melissa blends strategic insight with deep empathy. Her work centers the survivor experience through immersive workshops, live events, and innovative initiatives that foster connection, healing, and visibility. A fierce advocate and visionary, she is on a mission to prove that healing isn't polite, it's a revolution. Through every project, Melissa creates spaces where survivors can reclaim their voices, feel seen, and rise. I hope you enjoy our interesting conversation regarding healing and how to reclaim your power after narcissistic relationships. Melissa has so much to share with us. Enjoy. Hello. On this week's episode, we have the great pleasure of having Melissa Sampson with us. I'm so excited to be interviewing you, Melissa. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. We're going to get right into it. And I'm going to just start with we're going to just go right on into it with my first question.
Okay.
Talk to us about healing. Tell us about healing.
Well, I look at healing as more like it's a verb. It's something that is always ongoing, and it changes form, and it changes during different stages of what you're going through. So when I feel like I've always been healing. And what I want to say is that before I learned about narcissistic abuse, there was always a deep part of me that knew what I was interacting with was wrong. So it was always like this rebellious part of me that was pushing back, but I would meet it like not understanding what was happening to me. I would immediately like shrink back to my role in like my family system. But the healing was, and I think that's the innate part of it, is that I knew that my voice mattered. And in some situations, like in family dynamics, my voice was allowed to be heard, but not always. So I had to learn early to be careful with what I said, because I was challenging a power dynamic. And so there were instances of, I guess, instances of healing, quote unquote, of where I would set boundaries and say, no, that's not okay with like a family member. And then other instances, depending on the power dynamic, I couldn't. So I always had like a knowledge of understanding of like what it meant to set boundaries. And I look at boundary setting as a form of healing, because you're protecting yourself.
Right.
So healing to me, it evolves over time, like through understanding, like when I learned about narcissism and I learned about red flags, and I learned about how to protect myself. I mean, and then that's when it transitioned over that I knew that I wasn't fully healing in those environments. In fact, really true healing was getting out of those environments and understanding how those systems were putting me in a role that I didn't consciously sign up for. I was manipulated into.
Right. I really love the way you say that, pardon me, that you knew something was off, right? You understood that it didn't quite feel right. And I think that that is so often how we start our healing journey, is that internal acknowledgement to ourselves, huh, why does this not feel quite right? Even if I don't have the language or the understanding or I feel like I'm missing something. I know something isn't quite right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it evolves and like it changes as you learn new things and you're like, wow, that's gaslighting. That's emotional manipulation. That's
Right.
emotional control. That's coercive control. You know all the things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that we don't learn until I mean, so often in our families of origin is where we get these first experiences of the kind of abuse that you're describing, and or our first experience with a narcissist, and so we just don't developmentally have the skills, right, to or the language to identify. We just kind of have that gut feeling that something doesn't feel right, and then as we develop and grow and have more relationships, we learn, oh yeah, that's what this is. Then we get to learn that language and figure out how to get out of it. um, as the audience knows that I ask my guests questions in advance and that I sometimes refer back to that. One of the things that you mentioned in your response that I absolutely loved, and so I want to come back to that, is that healing's a rebellion. Tell me about that.
Yeah. And so, and I know it's a little assertive, but many years ago when I was in a really toxic work environment, there was this person that was a covert narcissist and was very manipulative and very passive aggressive. And at the time, I didn't have the vocabulary to really name it.
Mm.
But she she was actually that situation. I won't go too much into it, but that situation was what pushed me heavily into this work. But
Mm.
um, I was trying to tell my bosses, because I had multiple, and I was trying to explain to them her her passive aggressiveness was a form of physical intimidation because she was over 6 foot tall. And so
Ah.
even though she wasn't threatening me, she was. It was very threatening. And I was trying to explain to them, but the leadership was so not ill equipped to deal with my complaint. And this is another reason why I got into wanting to bring awareness to narcissistic abuse. That they're what they decided to do was just sort of like, well, you could just stay away from her. We'll just be an intermediary,
Mm.
and you don't have to deal with her. You don't even have to go back into the office. And I was like, wow, like I'm never going to have to work with someone who's in a administrative leadership role because you guys don't know how to handle this. And so them keeping me away compounded my fear,
Mm.
amplified. But and at the same time they were protecting me from her, they were also telling me, well, this is really no big deal. But everything in my body said she is a threat to my safety, and I did not have the vocabulary to advocate for us to say it. And it was, when those toxic workplace environments is tied to your financial well-being. So I was like, I've got to figure out, I need to document this so that I can call it out in a formal way so that it calls her out. But anyway, so it ended up getting elevated. And when I elevated it all the way up to the executive director, they came back and said, this is no big deal.
Ah.
That psychological, so it was gaslighting, and I didn't understand what was happening to me. And that um, I was angry and I was
Mhm.
also scared. And they did not have the tools or the skill set to be able to lead me out of that. When I went home, but I wasn't going to give up the fight because at that point they had already told me I didn't have to come back into the office. And so when it got elevated to HR, they had realized that they should have never have told me I didn't have to go back into the office because now it was a liability.
Right.
And so they decided to silence me. And the fierce rebel warrior inside of me took that and fought back. And that's the rebellion
Yeah.
because they kept trying to silence me. All I wanted them to do was talk to her. But they're like, "Do you want to talk to her?" And I'm like, "No, she scares me." And they're like, "Well, this is really no big deal." So the psychological toll that took on me at home was I could not sleep because I what I was doing was I was challenging a power dynamic, but I didn't know I was
Mhm.
doing that. I thought I was just advocating for myself
Right.
because they had tried so hard to keep things status quo and normal. My desire for justice for how this person was treating me was my rebellion. It was me saying, this is not okay. And someone, you guys are in leadership, you need to do something about it. But they didn't. And then I felt because we were in the pandemic and I was working from home, I was isolated
Right.
from them. And so the rebellion is fighting back against a system that is like whose sole purpose is to silence you. And that's why I brought up because most of my rebellion happened in familial and professional work environments.
Mhm.
And at home, it was my mom and my grandmother. At work, it was all of the bosses that I had.
Right.
And I just, so the act of rebellion is knowing that, is finding the courage within yourself to say, this isn't right, speaking up, and knowing that you're challenging a system that is designed not to hear you, and
Yes.
how you have to be a warrior to do that. And so I just don't think people understand that healing is not always polite, it's a rebellion. You
Right.
are challenging a system that wants to keep you in your place, that wants to put you in a role so they can be have power over you. And to that I say no. So, no. And it's not, and so, and that can be in a as person stepping into a leadership role to bring awareness to this topic, you have to even be careful with how you say that because this is where domestic violence comes in.
Right.
And so the act of rebellion looks different in different environments. And so that's what Breezy Heart Foundation is all about, is
Right.
teaching that and helping
Right.
people and supporting them.
Right. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that story because so often we have a, a view that narcissistic relationships only happen in intimate partnerships or they only happen at home or and the reality is if you're dealing with a narcissist, that narcissist shows up everywhere in life, and that means they show up at work. But we don't talk about that. We don't talk about how they show up at work or when they show up at work, and there's not a lot of dialogue around that. So thank you for sharing so eloquently what your experiences was like at work and how other people in leadership roles responded to you, because I think that that gives our listeners kind of a framework for understanding if they're in a similar situation, and that underlying isolation that can be so devastating when you feel like you are alone and no one understands, and the fear that that is generated from that isolation, particularly like you said when it is tied to your financial well-being. Right, there is so much going on when you are dealing with a narcissist at work, and they're your boss, it is it's terrifying. And if we don't speak out about it, if we don't take the risk and speak out about it, what we know for absolute sure with total certainty is that pattern is going to play out again and again and again and again. And so even if, we know that it's not going to help us, you didn't stay in that job. I know this. You served whoever else is going to be working with that person by notifying human resources and leadership for future employees, right? You paid it forward in some ways by saying this is happening, so that in the hopes when another employee comes in and the same pattern plays out, that they'll start to understand that it's not the employees, that it's the boss.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
we gotta stand up, and it's scary, and it's very isolating, and so thank you for really talking so clearly and articulately about seeing these patterns in an environment that we don't talk about a lot. I really appreciate that piece. Okay, so also, I think another really important part about healing that we don't talk about, that I know you know a bunch about, and so I want to ask you, is how healing intersects with grieving. Can you address that a little bit?
That's healing and grieving. When I went no contact with my mom initially, I knew that I didn't want to do it, but I was the only I got to a point where I kept telling her. I honestly I did not have the words to articulate how she was making me feel, and I was constantly walking on eggshells, and it just became intolerable. I had to edit myself on social media, and I got tired of just being called dumb all the time,
Oh,
or fat or whatever. Like I just got
right.
tired
Yeah.
of the oppressive language until finally I had made the decision that I could not, because I had just had uh, my youngest daughter, and I could not handle postpartum and dealing with my mom. So I made the decision to go no contact. And that grief, the guilt, the
Mm,
shame, the sleepless nights, I I thought that there was something wrong with me for the longest time, because I would wake up at like 2, 3, 4 in the morning, I completely feeling like my nerve, like someone had rubbed sandpaper on my arms,
mm,
and my body, because my nerve endings were just so like I was so fried and like I felt electrified, and I couldn't understand what was happening to me, and it was, I recognized now that I was healing from like a trauma bond,
right.
and um, withdrawal and conditioning, like the removal of love and that person I thought would always be there. And then when I learned about, and this was the time I was learning a lot about narcissism, and I went back and I and had to come to the understanding that she's never going to change,
Mm,
and that nothing, and it has nothing to do with me.
yeah.
That she has her own wounds, her own trauma, her own stuff, and that healing, putting myself first,
Mhm,
and setting boundaries, which that was a very extreme boundary, but this is what I want to teach in my nonprofit,
mhm.
is for people who are going through the same thing, is you don't have to go as hardcore as no contact, but man, did I send a message.
But sometimes you do,
It
and it's
doesn't have
okay.
to be like that. And so that was part of my journey. I didn't know how to set boundaries. I was never taught, because it never benefited my toxic family system.
Right.
And so and then I had to recognize that, okay, here's some other ways you could have handled that, you know, and then recognize that I had to grieve the loss of the mother I never had.
Yeah.
I so idealized her to be a certain way, that she had to show up a certain way, and she, and I hope she never listens to this, doesn't, she did not have the capacity because of her own trauma, so that grief of of saying it's okay to set boundaries, it's okay to put yourself first, and um it's okay, and then, you know, and then grieving the loss of the relationship that I had with her. And
Right.
we have since reconnected, but that relationship is pretty badly damaged, but learning um what it meant to grieve the loss of a parent and still grieve, you know. So every year she sends gift cards for the girls, and in the beginning that used to trigger me a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and I had to understand why it triggered me so bad. And then, you know, now it doesn't, because I've just sort of accepted that she is who she is and I am who I am, and it's okay for her to set boundaries and me to set boundaries, but what's not okay is for me to go and do all the work. So I did reach out to her, and the door is open,
Mm-hmm.
but she has to meet me halfway. And
Yeah.
that's healthy.
Yeah.
That was hard acceptance, and that's part of the grieving process, is accepting that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that you make a really good point that, um, everybody has to make their own decision for what kind of relationship they're willing to have. And I just want to make the point that generally, when you've had a primary relationship, whether it's with a parent or an intimate partner, where they're narcissistic, you tend to um, attract those relationships others in other areas of your life. So it's very normal to have more than one narcissist in your life. For those of you out there that are thinking, "Oh man, why does this pattern keep showing up?" It's very common to until we learn some of the pattern interrupts and some of the skills creating those boundaries and some of the skills to have that pattern continue and to attract a narcissistic personality into our lives. And they can be, narcissism happens on a scale, and so it can be someone who's just highly narcissistic or that actually is has NPD. So just keep that in mind. It's totally normal to experience it that way. And, one of the things that you're describing, Melissa, is that idea of how I show up in that relationship and the role that I play is the thing that keeps happening. And I think one of the ways that you described it earlier to me was you were a caretaker, you're a peacekeeper, right? And that's having those patterns are the ones that as you are creating boundaries and as you're looking at your own personal rebellion at work, for example, that those things are being challenged. Those roles, you're rethinking them and you're questioning, it appears, whether you want to be in that role and how does that role look and where does it serve you and where doesn't, what changes you'd made in your life that had made the biggest impact for you. And one of your answers was that you used to play the role of caretaker and peacekeeper, and that you felt that in your relationships, um, and that you sacrifice your own needs in doing so. And so I'm just wondering if you feel like you've changed your tendency to play that role.
I got to the point with my mom where I was we are we sit on opposite sides of the political spectrum. And
Okay.
these, because I was never allowed to really express myself or have opinions unless they aligned with hers. When she would come up to visit my oldest daughter, we had to pack up our lives. We had to, our TV shows are,
Ah,
because we're cord cutters, so we have YouTube. So we'd have YouTube on, and we had to have a different account, things that did not have anything that would trigger a conversation because there was no emotional regulation with that. So anytime she came up, there were conversations we weren't allowed to have.
to
There
keep the
were
peace.
to keep the peace.
Okay.
And I got to the point where I didn't even want her to come up anymore. But
Mm,
I wanted to have the relationship with her. I wanted to have a mom. Like that's
mm,
the grieving process. I wanted a mom that would show up and I could come over and play with her granddaughter, and we could go, go get coffee or go to the mall or something. And that it just I couldn't because I was always policing and editing myself. I've never felt like I could be myself. And so um I had to learn to stop. Like going no contact was the only way because I had to figure out who I was in that because I had just become a new mom and step away. I had to figure out who I was without her in my life and then come back to it as someone who could say like this is what we watch. If you don't want to watch these things, then maybe you should stay at a hotel. But I was so focused on having her be part of this fairy tale thing that was never going to happen of like her being that mom.
right.
Um, I had to, in order to continue my healing journey, I had to put myself first and my family first, which was an identity shift. And I think that's where a lot of that transition came from.
Yeah, that's big.
So I don't know that I've answered your question, and I'm trying to go back to it, which is like I
No,
had to learn how to put myself first. I had to learn how to speak up for myself, even if my voice shook, even if I was scared, even if there were consequences, because now I was a mom and this was my house and this was my family. And when you are when you are 30 plus something and you don't know what boundaries are, no one ever modeled that for you because it never benefited them, and you're learning how to assert yourself and your autonomy for the first time, that is that's the rebel, that's the warrior within you have to tap into.
right.
And so it started with even though that relationship with my mom ended up severing, leading up to that decision to go no to contact, it was me saying, no, we're in a pandemic. You can't fly here right now. We don't know what's going on with the vaccines, and we don't know how it's impacting children. Saying that was to her, she received that as an act of war because then it was like extended family was involved and I was this awful daughter who let her see her grandkids, but I had to say no because my kids were at risk. My life was at risk because at
Right.
that time we didn't understand how it moved around the country.
Right.
So that was my first experience with that, and I struggled with it, and it was hard, and I felt guilty, and I fell into the shame, blame, and I'm awful, and it was just, but I had to. And I started doing that in my work environment as well. And that example of me fighting back, all those things were happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Like
It's
where I
real
was saying,
interesting when you
yeah,
start saying no to people.
yeah,
You really start to get a feel for who other people are when you start saying no and their reactions to it. You get a
yes.
real clear indication of who someone is when you start telling them no.
Yeah, because in my mind, I was like, if Madison, my oldest daughter, if we got into an argument and she said, I don't want to talk to you anymore, and
Mhm.
then, I would be like, I would respect her space, but I would be moving heaven and earth to try to figure out how we could work together to fix it. But there was none of that from her.
Yeah.
It's because it's a power dynamic that's not fair. I have to be able to be my own person and show up in that relationship.
Right. Exactly. So I think you answered the question exactly. Exactly. You made huge changes that were very impactful. So thank you very much. What tips can you give listeners about how to make those changes?
I think. I would like to invite people to look at their healing as a revolution, an act of
Mm.
rebellion. And I know that that sounds very assertive. And the reason I'm saying is because you're going to find yourself, if you're not already there, in power dynamics across all your relationships that are going to try to put you in roles that
Mm.
you did not sign up for. And it's important to recognize that if someone is telling you that you're too sensitive, too much, or not enough, they're trying to put you in a position, like in a role,
Right.
that suits their power grab. And so healing is going to be you showing up and saying, we see things differently. Like standing up and saying, no, I'm not too much, I'm not enough.
Yeah.
And showing up with your actions on that as well. It's like look for, if you are in a relationship where you're not allowed to have your own political views, or prefer chocolate over strawberry because their favorite is strawberry, you're in a power dynamic that does not serve you.
Right.
So pushing back and saying, well, I like chocolate or I like vanilla, or it doesn't have to be a big thing, and confidently owning that, embracing that to me is an act of rebellion against the system.
Yeah.
You can like what you like, but I like what I like, and
And
move
and it's
forward with
often
that.
the small things. It often is the small things, or starts as the small things, that you get challenged on before, to test you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so actually that is the narcissist test, right?
Mhm.
Is, if you can go into a relationship with someone and say no to them, and they
Mhm.
say, "Okay, thank you for letting me know." That's a good sign. But if they're trying to manipulate you into liking strawberry when you're like, "No, I like chocolate. Stop it."
Right.
And then they get mad at you, and then it's all this whole passive aggressive thing. That's a toxic relationship. Rebel, girlfriend, rebel.
And run.
And run. Yeah. Yeah.
Rebel and run, the 2 R's.
So and I think the second one is learning to set boundaries without apology.
Mm.
And don't debate your worth with other people.
Mm.
Learning, and if you're nervous about setting boundaries, that's okay. We actually cover that in our Anchor and Rise community. It's free to join. It's on Facebook. And we talk about how to set boundaries and different boundary scripts. But you know, the thing with setting boundaries, and I think I've already discussed this at like my other examples, is that when you set a boundary, expect pushback,
Yes.
because you're challenging the system that's trying to keep you in your role, because they benefit from that power dynamic. So know that starting small is okay. It
Mhm.
and we cover that in our prevention education series, which is launching in June, about how to respond or identify gaslighting. But just know that it's part of the revolution. It's part
Yeah.
of the rebellion, setting
Yeah.
boundaries. It's like you're fighting for yourself and they're fighting for their power. You're fighting for power over you. They're fighting for power over them and you.
Yeah.
So start small. Just say no. Or, I had this really cute example of, maybe if you're someone who always does the coffee run or the Slurpee run if you go to 7-Eleven, and you always offer to pay.
Mhm.
And at first, it was this kind offer that you did because you're a kind person. And, but that person is, yeah, they say thank you, but you don't feel like they really appreciate it.
Mhm.
And you feel resentful and you want them to pay. Next time you go on that coffee or that Slurpee run, to say, hey, can you give me $5 for your drink? It's expensive.
Yeah.
And see what they say. Set a boundary. Say, I don't mind being generous, but you need to contribute too. And that's okay. And then the other part is like, one of the things that I included in Breezy Heart Foundation is healing through creative expression.
Mm.
That sometimes if you're a minor and you're in a power dynamic, like your parents are, narcissistic, and there's very little you can do until you turn 18 and get the heck out, is learning how to find yourself through writing,
Yeah.
journaling. It sometimes it really helps when you write down what you're experiencing, just as a way to put words to the experience.
Yes.
And the same thing with art. And the thing with creative expression is, and why I love like art therapy and stuff like that, is because it gives you control over the outcome. You could go into something and create and be totally in control, and it's all made from you, and it's such a great way to connect to yourself. So if you're someone going who is in a narcissistic abusive relationship, finding ways to express yourself through art, journaling, singing, anything,
Mhm.
gardening, anything like that is such a healing, a great way to do that.
Absolutely.
And then the other part of the healing journey is learning to trust yourself,
Mhm.
because what happens in these power dynamics is these subtle forms of emotional manipulation are designed to erode your sense of self
Mm.
trust. And it takes, when people are breaking away from these systems, it is sometimes they're doing it completely isolated. That you can always trust yourself. And that is the healing journey. That is when you know you've healed, is when you can go,
Mm.
you trust yourself, and your inner voice is louder than the person who's communicating, who's trying to control you. Is
Right.
like,
Right.
um, and that has been a life experience for me. As I remember several relationships that I got into where I knew something that they did, that it was a red flag. And I
Mm.
was like, but the love bombing was so intense. And I
Yeah.
just wanted to be in the relationship because they were so handsome.
Yeah. And it
Ended up
feels
fighting.
good.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
feels good, and it's
Yeah.
an easy distraction, and you can rationalize anything.
Yeah.
Um, but those little red flags, don't dismiss it.
Yeah.
That is your internal guidance warning you there's
Yeah.
danger ahead, and
Yep.
don't get yourself into trouble. So, learning to like really nurture your intuition. And if you're not ready to do that, because I know like when you are in that kind of cycle of abuse where you know, you're being told that you're too much, you're not enough, yada, yada, that learning to trust yourself is the hardest thing to do,
Mm.
because you've been told that the way you think is faulty. There's something
Right.
wrong with you.
Right.
And I would say that sometimes you can find that reconnection with yourself through, well, art therapy and creative expression, but also through spiritual tools,
Yes.
energy healing,
Mm.
like Reiki healing,
Mhm.
sound therapy, stuff like that. It really gets you out of your head and really connected to your body, which is why I love them.
Mhm.
And then I would say that because the entire focus of a narcissist is to isolate and control, when you're trying to recover from narcissistic abuse, you might find yourself fighting this battle alone. And that is scary, because they've, I found myself in that situation early in my 20s when I was dating, where I was being isolated away from my friends, and then he broke up with me,
Mhm.
and I didn't have anyone. And I thought that my life was over, which is
Yeah.
obviously not true, but the feeling of it is so intense and profound that you're going to want to find your battle buddies. Um,
That's a
or
great term
fighting
for
this
it.
war, especially if you're in that relationship and you haven't ended it yet,
Mm.
is to either find the person that you can go to say, look at what he sent me, and then
Mm.
analyze it and talk
Yes.
about it, and have that person validate you and support you, or reframe what's happening if you're feeling full of guilt and shame. And if you don't have that person, come to our Anchor and Rise community, because that is where you'll find your your battle buddy.
Yep, you need somebody that gets it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we practice boundary setting. We practice how to identify red flags using real life examples and stories, and it's really engaging. You should. It's definitely it's Anchor and Rise community on Facebook.
And just so listeners know, all of the everything will be in the show notes. All of this, all of the ways to contact Melissa and the details about the programs that she's talked about.
And then my last tip is just radical self validation. Is you're the only way you're going to get out of this is if you learn to be your own best friend. So it may sound scary when you're in these toxic environments or relationships where you've been kind of stripped of your voice and you're being gaslit to oblivion. Learning to validate yourself and say, what, as the boundary example I gave earlier, is like we see things differently. To hold on to yourself, validate yourself that your reality is real and true and perfectly fine, and you're allowed to have one.
Those are fantastic tips. Thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic. Uh, I really love the boundaries without apology. I think that's because we talk so much about boundaries. I love adding the without apology on the end of it. I think that's an important piece that we often don't touch upon. And I think so much with the writing and the journaling, I think that threads through so many of your other tips because it can keep us grounded. It can help us when we feel isolated. It can help us ground into our intuition. So um, that writing piece, that creative piece, whether it's through writing or storytelling or art therapy or whatever is the means that feels most connected to each person. There's so much benefit that you get out of that. Great tips. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
As we start to wrap up, I want you to tell me a little bit about, you've mentioned a couple of things, but can you go through a quick rundown of the things that you are offering? You've told us a little bit about, you've mentioned the boot camp, you've mentioned Breezy Heart Foundation, and you've mentioned the Anchor and Rise Facebook page. So can you just kind of go through and give us quick blurbs on each of the things that you're developing right now?
Yeah, so we also have the Shifting Tides Live podcast,
Mm.
which is a short form podcast that talks about all of the things that we've discussed, where we go over in like a short form, like 15 minutes, which I co-host with the radiant Jill McKnight here, um, where we break down and we go, okay, this is gaslighting. This two forms of gaslighting: trivialization, denial. This is love bombing. This is triangulation. And we go through and we give examples, and Jill brings her expertise in pulling in like the mindset work of it. And then we take that information and we bring it to the Anchor and Rise community, which is free to join. And we do a deeper dive and we give people boundary scripts and also like strategies. Like we'll do different like storytelling strategies and say, okay, what boundary script would you apply to this? And we do the same thing with spot that red flag, because it's all
Mhm.
about developing your emotional self-defense toolkit. We want you to be confident in identifying red flags and being able to take these practical tools and apply them to everyday relationships.
Yeah.
So, and then from that, if you want to go into a deeper dive, we have created a Sail to Strength boot camp, which is comprised of 3 classes. And the first one is a deeper dive and like sort of where we pull in like movies to give you, like your favorite movies to practice identifying red flags. And we do group work, and then we also have class 2 where we do role playing, where we'll give you we also incorporate movies where, but we do more interactive role play where you get the chance to practice saying them, and we talk about how you're feeling, how it connects to you. Because I remember when I was starting to learn how to set boundaries, I would physically shake because it was so scary. So we also include like how to regulate yourself, how to mentally prepare yourself for the pushback that you will experience.
Right.
And then our third class is healing, because that's what
Mhm.
this is all about. It's like we give you foundational, practical tools to take with you, and then we also give you like a one-on-one like plan for your personal healing journey, because it all looks different for each person.
Yes.
And while we do currently offer those classes, which we're launching in June, to to be able to help people learn these skills, and it's going to be online, we're also turning it into a retreat, hence the Sail to Strength. So we're hoping to, and we're going to be launching class 3, the healing on a healing cruise retreat.
Mm.
More information on that to come.
Yeah.
But next year in 2026, we're going to be doing these seminars at sea. So not only will you be able to go on vacation, but learn foundational skills that are going to
Yeah.
change your life in such a positive way. And you can bring your family, and it's a family event. We really focus on bring your battle buddy with you. Like they don't have
Yeah.
to attend, but come and like be part of the community, and you know, do margaritas on the deck, and let's go find out how we're gonna get some narcissists, and defend ourselves, and
Right.
how to change your life. It's going to
Yeah.
be fantastic next year.
Yeah.
So that's what we
Transform
have.
your
And
life with a cocktail.
exactly. And it's fun. And I love cruising, and cruising is such a great, and oceans they connect us all together. And
Right.
so this opportunity is opened up to anyone globally who wants to attend. It's not just out of Washington. And that's what I love about it, because the goal is to build a community online on water
Yeah.
where you can find and be with people who get it. And we
Yeah.
get it. And we
Yeah.
want to support you. So
Yeah,
those
we
are all
get
the
it.
things.
We do. We get it. And all of the details will be in show notes as well. So if you have any questions, you'll be able to reach out to Melissa. And of course, you can always reach out to me. And Melissa and I are building this amazing collaboration and partnership so that we can bring all of these services to you guys. All right, we have one last question for you before we are wrapped up on this fantastic interview. And that is, what is the one question that you wish more people asked that they never seem to?
Um, how to heal. Like, what does healing
Mhm.
look like on a daily basis? I think that's the biggest thing, is like, um, because I think like the misconception about healing is, I was talking to my friend, she was talking about how she started going to therapy, and that it's like this, they talk a lot about trauma, and it's like she's like, I'm going to need to like quit my job because this is my full-time job, is healing, and talking about all of these
Feels
things that
that way.
happened to me.
Yeah.
And while there are, and I'm not going to dismiss that there are some instances that we do require that level of intensity, I think the thing is with Breezy Heart Foundation is giving you actionable tools, things
Mhm.
that you can do on a daily basis that will help you live with a breezy heart. And that was the
Yeah.
goal of it. Is it doesn't always have to be, 1 hour a week with a therapist talking about painful trauma. Sometimes it's just learning how to set boundaries.
Yeah.
And what that shows up, maybe it's like Jill's morning mindset, where we're starting the day out with a positive mindset and writing down what we want to accomplish. That's what healing looks like. Healing looks like putting yourself first,
Yeah.
believing in yourself, loving yourself, and creating a routine that's what class 3 really focuses on. Creating something for your healing journey that works for you. It's
Right.
not one size fits all. So, and we also have I forgot to mention our prevention education classes, which are shorter sessions of the Sail to Strength Boot Camp, which is completely free. It's online. They're approximately 40 minutes, and you get a lot of free stuff in the process. So, and in there you can learn a lot of the things that I've just talked about that you can apply to every day. But yeah, like healing doesn't always look like, you know, intense, heavy therapy sessions. It can just be learning to say no or learning how to write, set your intentions for the day.
Yeah, rebuilding your life doesn't is often not what we think it is, and it happens in the moments in between often. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. It has, as always, it is such a pleasure talking to you, and I'm so glad that you took the time to join me so that my listeners have the benefit of hearing all of your wisdom. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course, really appreciate it. And to all you listeners out there, thanks so much for being here. We hope you have a fantastic day, and we'll see you soon. As we wrap up, here's the thing. I've made every mistake. I've literally been there and done that. It's one step at a time, and you'll get there. There's hope. You've got this. If you're struggling in a relationship and wondering if it might be controlling, you're not alone. Download my free PDF at locatecoaching.com/free gift to help you find clarity and confidence. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you soon.